The light in the room has softened now, reduced perhaps to the glow of a small screen or the faint silver wash of a street lamp filtering through the blinds, casting long, still shadows across the floor that look like islands in a dark sea. The air around you is still, settled, perhaps carrying the dry warmth of a heater or the cool, crisp stillness of the night outside. And as your breathing slows, finding that heavy, rhythmic cadence that precedes sleep, you might become aware of the sound of your own heart, that steady, muffled drum that has been beating since before you were born, a sound like an ocean trapped inside a shell. It is the most ancient sound you know, the first rhythm you ever heard, floating in the warm dark of the womb, and it is the sound that anchors you here in this moment, safe beneath the weight of the blankets. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from, drawing a map of our own across the night. But now, let the request fade. Let the phone drift from your mind and return to that pulse in your wrist, in your neck, that quiet thrumming of the blood. We often think of our blood as simply part of us, a fuel that keeps the machine running, but it is more than that. It is a library, a record, a liquid memory that has flowed unbroken through thousands of generations, passing from mother to child, a red thread winding all the way back into the deep forgotten silence of the earth. Imagine now that we are following that thread backward, not with the jarring speed of a rewinding film, but with the slow, inevitable drift of a tide going out. The room around you begins to dissolve, the sharp corners of the furniture softening into the blur of twilight, the hum of electricity fading into the hush of a wind moving through tall, dry grass. We are drifting back through the centuries, past the noise of the industrial age, past the stone silence of the cathedrals, past the iron clash of empires, deeper and deeper into the velvet dark of deep time. The air grows colder, sharper, smelling of damp earth and pine needles and the thick musk-heavy scent of animals that no longer walk the world. We are standing now in a time before the cities were lit, a time when the night was absolute, a heavy blanket of charcoal and ice that stretched from horizon to horizon, broken only by the shivering light of the stars, which seem brighter here, closer, like eyes watching from the void. You can feel the cold on your skin, a biting raw chill that seeks the warmth of the bone, and you can hear the crackle of a fire, small and precious, snapping against the silence. This is the world of the Paleolithic, the old Stone Age, a time when humanity was a small, fragile thing, huddled against the vastness of a planet that did not care if we survived. And here, in the firelight, we look at the people around us, their faces smeared with ash and grease, their eyes wide and alert, reflecting the flames. They look like us. They feel like us. But inside their veins, the river flows with a uniformity that we have lost. For millions of years, the blood of our ancestors sang the same song, a harmony written in proteins and enzymes that linked us to the great family of primates, to the apes in the canopy and the monkeys in the trees. We were part of the chain, unbroken and whole. Science tells us that for eons, every human being on Earth possessed a specific protein on the surface of their red blood cells, a marker known today as the rhesus factor. It was a badge of belonging, a chemical signal that said, "I am of this Earth, I am of this lineage." It was as constant as the rising sun, as predictable as the tides. There was no division, no negative, no positive. There was only the blood, thick and red and uniform, pulsing through the veins of hunters on the tundra and gatherers in the savannah. But then, something happened. We imagine this change happened suddenly, a lightning strike of mutation, a sudden rupture in the code. It feels like a single moment where the rhythm skipped, a heartbeat that faltered. But the truth seems slower, quieter, and far more unsettling. It was not a thunderclap, but a whisper. Somewhere in the dark, amidst the crushing weight of the ice ages, a child was born without the marker. The protein was gone. The chain was broken. We do not know the name of this child. We do not know if they were born in a cave in the Pyrenees or under the open sky of the Atlas Mountains, but we know that with their first breath, a new silence entered the human story. The blood had changed. It was as if a door had been locked, or perhaps opened, a subtle shift in the architecture of life that went unnoticed by the mother who held the infant, warming its small body against the cold wind. They could not have known that this difference was not just a random error, but the beginning of a mystery that would haunt their descendants for 40,000 years. It was a subtraction, a deletion, a negative in a world of positives. Why would nature, which builds complexity over millions of years, suddenly decide to remove something so fundamental? Why would it sever the link that bound us to our primate cousins? There is a tension here, a feeling of unease that settles in the stomach. We are taught that evolution is a slow, steady climb, a process of adding useful traits, of becoming stronger, faster, better adapted. But this feels different. This feels like an intervention or a scar. As we sit by this ancient fire, watching the sparks rise into the chimney of the night, we can almost feel the weight of that anomaly. The wind shifts, blowing smoke into our eyes, stinging and blurring the vision. The shadows dance against the rock walls, taking on shapes that look half human, half something else. We are safe here, for now, held in the suspension of the dream. But we know that out there in the dark, the change has begun. The blood has split. The unity is gone. And as the fire burns down to embers, glowing like red eyes in the dark, we are left with the lingering question that hangs in the cold air like a mist. Was this a loss? A simple mistake in the copying of the code? Or was it the moment we became something else? The silence of the prehistory offers no answer. Only the sound of the wind, the crack of the ice, and the steady, quiet thrum of the heart, beating a rhythm that is no longer the same for everyone. The separation has started, quietly, irreversibly, a ghost entering the bloodstream, unnoticed while the world sleeps on, unaware that the definition of what it means to be human has just been rewritten in the dark. The embers of that first campfire do not simply fade. They settle into the earth, becoming part of the soil, layer upon layer, pressing down into the geological silence as the wheel of the sky turns overhead, not just for a night, but for 1,000 centuries. We drift further back now, the ice retreating, the landscape softening from the harsh gray of the glacial maximum into the lush, vibrating green of a world much older, a world where the seasons moved like slow tides across a supercontinent that was still dreaming of its final shape. Here, in this vast sun-drenched epic, there is a profound sense of continuity, a biological peace that stretches unbroken from the steaming jungles of the equator to the temperate forests of the north. If we were to listen to the collective heartbeat of this era, we would hear a single unified rhythm, a drumbeat shared by every creature that walked on 2 legs and many that walked on 4. This is the era of the unbroken circle, a time when the blood that flowed through human veins was indistinguishable in its fundamental architecture from the blood of the great primates watching us from the canopy. There were no anomalies yet, no hidden divisions. It seems that for millions of years, nature had settled on a specific design, a protein marker clinging to the surface of the red blood cells like a tiny chemical flag, waving in the microscopic current of the plasma. We call it the RH factor now, named after the rhesus macaque in which it was later found, a small, verified detail that links our modern science to this ancient arboreal past. But back then, it had no name. It was simply the way things were. It was the yes inherent in the blood, the positive affirmation that we were children of this earth, grown from the same root as the chimpanzee and the gorilla, the macaque and the baboon. We carried the mark of the old world in every drop of fluid that kept us alive. Imagine the serenity of that biological certainty. A mother in this deep past, crouching by a river to drink, her reflection broken by the ripples, carried a child within her that was perfectly compatible with her own body. There was no war within the womb, no silent alarm triggered by a foreign presence. Her immune system, the great guardian of self, recognized the life growing inside her as kin, as part of the same ancient tapestry. The blood of the fetus and the blood of the mother spoke the same language, a dialect of proteins that had been refined over eons of trial and error until it was flawless. It is a comforting thought, is it not? To imagine a time when we were so completely at home in our own skin, so deeply woven into the fabric of the animal kingdom that there was no friction, no biological rejection. The sun rose and set, the great herds migrated across the plains in rivers of dust and noise, and humanity moved with them, a small but integral part of the cycle. We were not yet other. We were not yet separated by the strange, lonely mutation that would come later. We were simply another expression of the primate soul, wandering the garden. Scientists still debate how long this stability lasted, whether it was the full 6 million years since we split from the common ancestor, or if there were other, smaller fluctuations lost to the fossil record. But the overwhelming evidence suggests a long, unbroken summer of genetic uniformity. In this world, to be human was to be ARG-positive. It was the default setting of our species, the standard template stamped out by evolution because it worked. It connected us to the deep past, to the ancestors who did not yet have language, who communicated in gestures and calls, who slept in nests of woven branches under the stars. The blood was a tether, holding us to them, and as we drift through this green, humid world, watching the light filter through the leaves, we can feel the heaviness of that connection. It is a warm, drowsy feeling, like lying in the sun on a rock that has absorbed the heat of the day. There is no anxiety here, no sense of being an outsider. The earth acknowledges us. The trees seem to know our shape. The predators and the prey play out their roles in a dance that we understand because it is written in our very cells. But even in the perfection of a summer afternoon, the shadows eventually begin to lengthen. The atmosphere of the dream shifts slightly. Not with a sudden jolt, but with the subtle cooling of the air that signals the coming of evening. We know, because we are remembering this from the future, that this unity cannot last forever. The universe is restless. It does not like things to remain static for too long. Mutation is the engine of change, the random roll of the dice that pushes life into new shapes, new territories. But usually, these changes are small. A slight shift in skin tone to handle the sun, a change in the shape of the nose to warm the cold air. They are surface changes, cosmetic adjustments. What is coming is different. It is a fundamental alteration of the blueprint, a deletion of the yes that had defined us for so long. But for now, let us linger a moment longer in the warmth of the unbroken circle. Let us watch the sun dip below the horizon of this ancient world, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and gold. The sounds of the day, the insects, the birds, the distant calls of the troop, begin to fade into the chirping chorus of the night. The first stars appear, identical to the stars we see tonight, yet watching a different world. A world where every human heart beats in the same chemical time signature. It feels safe here. It feels complete. You can almost feel the phantom sensation of that original blood, that heavy, iron-rich fluid that knew exactly where it belonged. It is a memory of belonging that perhaps we all still carry, buried deep beneath the layers of civilization and complexity. A nostalgia for a time when we were not a puzzle to ourselves. The night deepens, and the great silence of the Pliocene settles over the land, a silence so profound that it hums in the ears. We are resting in the calm before the storm, the long, quiet breath before the plunge. The camera of our mind's eye pulls back slowly, leaving the sleeping figures of our ancestors huddled together for warmth, their blood moving quietly through their veins, carrying the ancient seal of the primate, unaware that the ice is gathering in the north, and with it a cold wind that will bring a change so profound, so mysterious, that we are still trying to understand it tens of thousands of years later. The circle is about to be broken. The yes is about to become a no. But here, in the dark, the connection still holds, gentle and strong, binding us to the earth and to each other in a web of red, unbroken lines. The warmth of that ancient summer begins to leach away, drawn out into the vast, indifferent vacuum of space as the great wheel of the climate turns once more. We are moving forward now, sliding through the millennia like a sled over fresh snow, watching the green world retreat. The forests shrink, pulling back into isolated refuges, replaced by the encroaching gray and white of the steppes and the tundra. The air grows thin and biting, tasting of dust and crushed rock. The sky hangs low and heavy, a ceiling of slate that presses down on the world. We have arrived in the grip of the last great ice age, a time when the earth itself seemed to be holding its breath, freezing the landscape into a sculpture of silence. It is here, somewhere in this landscape of wind-scoured plains and looming glaciers, roughly 35,000 to 40,000 years ago, that the anomaly appears. It does not arrive with the fanfare of a comet streaking across the sky, nor with the violence of a volcano. It arrives in the quietest way possible, in the dark warmth of a womb, in the sudden, silent rewriting of a single genetic line. A child is born, perhaps in a cave sheltered from the blizzard, perhaps in a tent of mammoth hide flapping in the gale. And this child is different. Not on the outside. They have 10 fingers, 10 toes, the same hunger for milk, the same cry that pierces the cold air. But inside, the flag is gone. The ancient protein, the rhesus factor that has linked their ancestors to the dawn of time, has vanished. They are the first RH negative. It feels less like a mutation and more like a subtraction, a sudden clearing of the board. Why here? Why now? The timing is strange, coinciding with a period of intense upheaval in human history. This is the era when modern humans, Homo sapiens, are spreading into Europe, encountering the Neanderthals who have ruled these lands for hundreds of thousands of years. It is a time of migration, of contact, of the mixing of worlds. Some scientists have speculated, though it remains a quiet debate in the margins of academia, that perhaps this blood type was a reaction to this mixing, or perhaps a relic of a population that has since vanished entirely, leaving only this ghostly signature in our veins. But in the moment, there is no science, only the reality of survival. The child grows, the trait is passed on. It is a recessive spark, hidden, waiting for two carriers to meet, to kindle the flame of the phenotype. It spreads slowly, invisibly, moving with the clans as they follow the reindeer herds, as they skirt the edges of the great ice sheets. We can imagine the resilience required for this mutation to take hold. In a world where every birth is a gamble, where infection and cold and hunger are constant companions, a genetic trait that could potentially turn a mother's body against her own offspring seems like a fatal flaw, a biological dead end. And yet, it persists. It does not flicker out. It clings to the lineage with a tenacity that defies the brutal logic of natural selection. Perhaps there was a trade-off, a hidden advantage that we can only guess at, a resistance to a pathogen that stalked the Ice Age tundra, a fortitude against the cold that allowed them to endure when others perished. Or perhaps it was simply luck, the sheer, stubborn will of a specific family line that refused to die out. There is a haunting beauty in this survival. Imagine a small band of hunter-gatherers moving across the white expanse, their breath pluming in the air. Among them walks the carrier of the new blood, indistinguishable from the rest, yet carrying the seed of a future mystery. They are walking into the teeth of the wind, wrapping their furs tighter, their eyes scanning the horizon for the dark shape of prey. The silence of the ice is vast, amplifying the sound of their footsteps, the crunch of snow, the soft murmur of their voices. They are alone in a way we can scarcely comprehend, tiny specks of warmth in a frozen cathedral. And within them, the blood is changing. The no has entered the stream. It is a spark in the ice, a small, cold fire that burns without consuming. As we watch them trudge forward, we sense that this is not just a biological event, it is the beginning of an identity. This specific mutation will not spread evenly across the globe. It will cluster, it will hide, it will find refuges where it can flourish. It is the beginning of a divergence, a branching path that will eventually lead to the high valleys of the Pyrenees, to the coastal cliffs of the Atlantic, to the royal courts of history. But here, it is just a single heartbeat in the storm. The wind howls, driving snow into the folds of their clothing, but they keep moving. They have to. To stop is to die. And so the carrier of the spark walks on, carrying the anomaly forward, step by step, into the uncertain future. The cold is intense, numbing the extremities, but the core remains hot, alive, pulsing with the strange new rhythm. It is a fragile thing, this new blood, vulnerable to the crushing indifference of the elements, yet it possesses a hidden strength, a resilience that will see it through the collapse of ice shelves and the rising of seas. The scene holds a heavy, dreamlike quality. The slow motion of the figures against the white, the lack of color, the dominance of the wind. It feels like a memory of a hard winter that has settled deep in the bones, a winter that lasted for generations. We are witnessing the planting of a seed in frozen ground, a seed that should not grow, but does. And as the blizzard thickens, obscuring the figures from view, wrapping them in a curtain of white, we are left with the sensation that something profound has shifted. The genetic lock has been picked. The door to the anomaly is now open, and there is no closing it. The wind continues to scream over the glaciers, but beneath the noise, the quiet, persistent pulse of the RH negative blood has begun its long journey through time, a secret carried in the veins of the survivors, waiting for the ice to melt, waiting for the world to change again. The wind that scoured the open tundra eventually drives us toward the shelter of the mountains, pushing the scattered bands of humanity into a narrowing corridor where the earth folds up to meet the sky. We are drifting south now, away from the crushing weight of the Scandinavian ice sheet, seeking the pockets of warmth that linger like forgotten embers in the landscape. We find ourselves in a rugged, formidable region where modern France meets Spain, a land of limestone peaks, deep green valleys, and rivers that carve their way through the rock with the patience of geologic time. This is the Franco-Cantabrian Refuge, a natural fortress bordered by the Pyrenees and the Cantabrian Mountains, and it is here that the wandering stops. The world outside is hostile, a frozen wasteland where the temperature plummets and the winds carry the dust of ground-up mountains. But here, in the deep winding valleys, there is shelter. The people move into the mouths of the earth, into the great limestone caves that honeycomb the region. We follow them in, leaving the blinding white of the glacial winter for the cool, damp absolute of the dark. The air here changes instantly. It becomes still, heavy with the scent of wet stone, bat guano, and the mineral tang of water dripping endlessly from stalactites into invisible pools. It is a womb of rock, a place where time seems to lose its direction. The fire is lit, and the shadows leap up the walls, revealing a cathedral of natural stone that sparkles with calcite crystals. It is in this isolation, in this specific geographic bottle, that the anomaly of the blood begins to concentrate. Imagine a population cut off from the rest of the world by walls of ice and mountains, a small, tight-knit genetic island where the outside world ceases to exist for thousands of years. Here, the carriers of the RH negative trait are not diluted by a constant influx of strangers. They marry within the clan, within the valley, passing the no from generation to generation until it becomes a defining signature of their people. It is a genetic drift, a slow, silent accumulation of difference. Archaeologists refer to this specific sanctuary as the Franco-Cantabrian Refuge, suggesting it was the primary reservoir for the human population of Western Europe during the last glacial maximum. But for those huddled around the fires, it is simply the only world there is. They do not know they are unique, they only know that they are the survivors. And in the flickering light of the tallow lamps, they begin to leave their mark. We see them mixing ochre and charcoal with animal fat, pressing their hands against the cold walls, blowing pigment over them to leave a negative stencil, a hand where the hand is not. It is a profound symbol for a people whose blood carries a negative definition. I was here, the handprint says. I am real. We watch them paint the great beasts of the Ice Age, the bison, the horse, the mammoth, capturing their spirits on the rock face with a sensitivity and power that still stops the breath today. These are not crude sketches. They are masterworks of observation, born of a mind that sees the world with a heightened, vibrating intensity. Is it possible that the blood, this different chemical river, brought with it a different way of seeing? A sensitivity to the environment that made the art more than just decoration, but a vital, magical act of connection? We cannot say for sure, but the correlation is there, whispering in the dark. The people of this refuge are the ancestors of the Basques, the Euskaldunak, who will one day emerge from these mountains with a language that baffles the world. As we listen to the soft murmur of their voices echoing in the cave, we are hearing the roots of Euskara, a tongue that has no known relatives on the entire planet. It does not sound like the Romance languages that will wash over Europe thousands of years later. It sounds like the wind in the gorges, like the cracking of stones, like the old pre-Indo-European earth. Just as their blood is an island, so is their speech. They are a singularity. The isolation of the refuge acts as a crucible, burning away the unnecessary, hardening the essential. The RH negative blood becomes the norm here, rising to frequencies seen nowhere else on Earth. 20, 30, perhaps even 40% of the population carrying the silent marker. It is a concentration of the old European lineage, the hunter-gatherers who weathered the storm while others perished. We can feel the intimacy of this existence. The clan is everything. The bloodline is the lifeline. To be cast out is to die in the cold. So they cling to each other, reinforcing the genetic distinctiveness with every union. There's a sense of safety here, but also a sense of intense pressure. The pressure of the rock, the pressure of the ice, the pressure of survival. The cave walls seem to hold the memories of every birth and every death. We see a mother nursing her child in the firelight, her skin pale from the long winters and the lack of sun, the veins beneath the surface tracing blue maps of the life within. She does not know that her blood is a puzzle. She only knows the warmth of the infant, the smell of the smoke, the safety of the stone. But there is a tragedy waiting in the biology, a silent sorrow for the second-born, the third-born, who might not survive the clash of blood types if the father was different, if the balance was wrong. Yet here, where the blood is shared, where the anomaly is the rule, perhaps there was peace. Perhaps the curse of the RH disease was less frequent because they were all the same, all belonging to the brotherhood of the negative. The refuge holds them, keeping them safe from the genetic dilution of the migrating herds of humanity that will come later. It is a time capsule, sealed by the glaciers. As we drift through these cavernous halls, watching the light play over the painted bison that seem to gallop across the ceiling, we feel the weight of their solitude. They are the guardians of a genetic secret, waiting for the ice to melt. The water drips steadily, a metronome in the dark, counting down the centuries until the doors of the refuge will open and this distinct ancient blood will flow out into a world that has forgotten where it came from. But for now, they are the people of the stone, the dreamers in the dark, holding the spark of difference safe within the mountain's heart, while the wind outside continues to howl its song of ice and erasure, powerless to extinguish the fire that burns within the cave. We step out from the protective shadow of the rock now, moving from the sanctuary of the inner earth to the blinding crystalline reality of the entrance. The transition is sharp, a physical blow to the senses. The world outside the cave is a vast expanse of aching white and bruised gray, a landscape where the light bounces off the snow with a ferocity that sears the retina. Here stands the sentry, a figure wrapped in furs, motionless against the wind, a statue carved from patience and necessity. We are witnessing the emergence of a specific role, a vocation born perhaps from the very chemistry of the blood that flows so uniquely through his veins. If the cave is the womb of the people, the sentry is the membrane that separates safety from extinction. There is a quiet theory, whispered in the margins of anthropology and genetics, that the RH negative lineage carried with it a suite of traits that were not merely incidental, but vital adaptations for a specific kind of survival. We watch the sentry's eyes scanning the horizon, eyes that are likely lighter in color, perhaps green or hazel or a piercing blue, possessing a sensitivity to light that makes the glare of the sun almost painful. In the modern world, we might call this photophobia, a medical inconvenience. But here, in the twilight of the Pleistocene, it is a superpower. It allows him to see into the shadows, to detect the slightest shift in contrast, to spot the silhouette of a cave lion or the flank of a reindeer against the complex backdrop of the tundra long before anyone else. He is the early warning system of the tribe. We can feel the tension in his body, a perpetual state of high-wire alertness. His nervous system seems tuned to a higher frequency, vibrating like a taut string. While others in the clan might sleep heavily, exhausted by the day's hunt, the sentry sleeps lightly, drifting in a shallow borderland where the snap of a twig or the shift of the wind is enough to jerk him back to full wakefulness. It is an exhausting way to live, this inability to fully turn off, this burden of constant vigilance. But the tribe survives because he cannot rest. We imagine the blood itself playing a role in this, a fluid that runs perhaps a fraction of a degree cooler, a metabolism that prioritizes the brain and the senses over the digestion, a trade-off made by evolution in the hard currency of calories. He feels the drop in barometric pressure before the storm arrives, a physical ache in the joints or a heaviness in the head that serves as a forecast. He smells the ozone of the coming snow. He hears the low-frequency rumble of a herd moving miles away, a sound felt in the chest as much as heard in the ear. This is the sentry's vigil, a state of being where the boundary between the human and the environment is porous. He does not just observe the world, he absorbs it. It flows through him. And in this heightened state, we see the origins of the outsider feeling that so many descendants of this line will report thousands of years later, the sense of being a part, of watching the world rather than participating in it, of being overwhelmed by the noise and the chaos of a crowd. Here, on the edge of the ice, that separation is functional. He stands apart because he must. If he joins the laughter by the fire, who will watch the dark? The silence of the landscape is immense, but to him, it is loud with information. The wind tells him of the thaw in the south. The birds tell him of the predator in the north. He is a master of the unseen, a reader of the invisible text of the wild. Scientists still debate whether this heightened sensory processing is genetically linked to the RH negative factor or if it is a cultural adaptation that coincidentally overlaps. But in the narrative of the blood, the connection feels intuitive. It is the legacy of the hunter who could not afford to miss a detail. We watch him shift his weight, the snow crunching softly under his boots. He is lonely perhaps, but there is a pride in this isolation. He guards the lineage. He protects the unique genetic inheritance huddling in the cave behind him. He is the wall. And as the sun begins to dip, painting the snow in shades of violet and rose, we see him squint against the dying light, his pupils contracting, his mind racing through the catalog of risks. He is the ancestor of every person who has ever felt uncomfortable in a loud room, every person who has woken up at 3:01 a.m. with a start, sensing a presence that isn't there. It is not a disorder, it is a memory. It is the ghost of the sentry, standing his ground in the deep time, ensuring that the clan lives to see another sunrise. The wind picks up, biting at his exposed skin, but he does not flinch. He is built for this. He is the wire that carries the current of survival, the spark that refuses to go out. The cold is his companion, the silence his teacher. And as the stars begin to prick the canopy of the night, mirroring the cold fire in his own eyes, we understand that this vigilance is the price of the blood. It is a gift that comes with a heavy weight, a duty that spans the generations. He blinks once, clearing the frost from his lashes, and continues his watch. A solitary figure against the vast, indifferent machinery of the Ice Age, holding the line for us all, breathing the cold air, listening to the heartbeat of the world, waiting for the dawn that seems so very far away. While the sentry guards the perimeter of the physical world, scanning the ice for the shadow of a wolf or the silhouette of a rival tribe, a different kind of vigilance is awakening inside the warmth of the shelter, deep within the most sacred and private space of all, the human body. We move now from the biting wind of the ridge to the soft, fire-lit intimacy of the firs where a mother holds her newborn. This is the domain of the invisible wall, a barrier not made of stone or ice, but of biology itself, a tragic fortification that will define the sorrow of this lineage for thousands of years. The scene appears peaceful at first. The first child has been born, a healthy, crying infant with strong lungs and a fierce grip, drinking the milk of survival. In this first birth, the anomaly of the blood often stays silent, a sleeping dragon that does not wake, The mother, with her RH negative blood, that clear ancient stream, has carried an RH positive child, the offspring of a father who carries the common protein. Through the 9 months of gestation, the two blood systems remained mostly separate, drifting side by side like two rivers separated by a thin levee of tissue. The mother's body did not yet know that the child within her was different, that it carried the positive flag of the old primate world, which she herself lacked. But birth is a violent, messy miracle. As the child enters the world, the levee breaks. A tiny amount of the baby's blood escapes into the mother's stream, a few drops, no more than a tear's worth. But it is enough. It is a signal. A message sent to the mother's immune system, that great internal sentry we spoke of. The mother's body detects the intruder, the foreign protein, and it recoils. It does not see a son or a daughter. It sees a virus, a threat, something that does not belong. And so, quietly, invisibly, while the mother sings to her healthy firstborn, her body begins to forge weapons. It creates antibodies, silent assassins designed to hunt down and destroy this specific protein. They are the soldiers of the invisible wall, and they will wait. They will wait for a year, for 5 years, for a decade. They will wait for the next time. This is the heartbreak that lies at the center of the RH negative mystery. The first child is the trap that nature sets. The second child is the one who pays the price. Time drifts forward in the cave. The seasons turn. The first child grows strong, learning to walk on the mossy floor, learning to throw a spear. The parents, emboldened by this success, conceive again. They cannot know the war that has been declared inside the womb. They cannot see the microscopic tragedy unfolding. As the second fetus grows, carrying the same RH positive blood as its older sibling, the mother's body remembers. The memory of the blood is long and unforgiving. The antibodies, those silent sentries, recognize the signature. They do not wait for birth this time. They cross the placenta, passing through the barrier that should be a shield, and they attack. It is a biological betrayal of the highest order, the life-giver turning against the life-given, not out of malice, but out of a blind chemical confusion. We can imagine the sorrow that follows, a sorrow that must have hung over these prehistoric clans like a heavy fog. The baby is born, but it is not like the first. It is pale, perhaps, or strangely yellowed, the skin taking on the hue of old ivory or saffron, the hallmark of jaundice, the wreckage of red blood cells destroyed by the mother's own immunity. The infant is lethargic, too weak to cry, too tired to nurse. The life fades from it day by day, slipping away like water through cupped hands. The parents watch, helpless. They offer prayers to the spirits of the cave. They rub the small body with ochre. They try to warm it with their own skin. But the sickness is deep inside, in the very river of life. They could not have known it was the blood. How could they? To them it must have seemed like a curse. Perhaps they thought the mother had looked at the moon too long, or that the father had offended a spirit of the hunt. Perhaps they whispered that the child was too beautiful for this world, or that the other side wanted it back. The tragedy of hemolytic disease of the newborn, what we now diagnose with a simple blood test and treat with a shot, was, for the vast majority of human history, a profound and inexplicable spiritual crisis. It was the curse of the second born. It created a pattern of loss that shaped the demographics of the tribe. We see the mother, weeping in the shadows, her arms empty, wondering why her body is a graveyard for her own children. This biological incompatibility acted as a brutal evolutionary filter. It meant that RH negative women could often only successfully breed with RH negative men, or else face a high probability of tragedy after the first pregnancy. It forced the lineage to turn inward, to marry within the group, within the safety of the shared blood. If a woman found a mate whose blood matched hers, a fellow negative, the wall did not rise. The antibodies slept. The children lived. And so, without understanding the science, the survivors learned the pattern. They learned that certain lineages could mix and others could not. It was a knowledge bought with grief, etched into the cultural memory of the people. This may be why the RH negative populations remained so concentrated, so isolated. It was not just geography, it was a biological imperative. To step outside the circle was to invite death into the womb. We can feel the weight of this silence in the prehistoric record. Archaeologists have found infant burials, tiny skeletons dusted with red ochre, curled into the fetal position as if waiting to be born again. We look at them and wonder, were these the victims of the invisible wall? Were these the blue babies, the yellow babies, the ones who faded? Science still debates the extent of this pressure, questioning how early humans navigated these genetic minefields, but the statistical reality is undeniable. Without modern medicine, this incompatibility is a ruthless editor of the gene pool. It creates a story of survival that is steeped in loss. Yet, amidst the sorrow, there's a strange resilience. The bloodline did not die out. It survived the sieves of natural selection, persisting against the odds. This suggests that the women who carried this blood were strong, that the communities were tight-knit, supporting the mothers through their grief, celebrating the children who did survive with a fierce, protective intensity. The invisible wall separated the living from the dead, but it also separated the us from the them. It solidified the identity of the clan. The blood became a secret, a test, a hidden truth that only revealed itself in the mystery of birth and death. As the fire burns low and the grieving mother finally sleeps exhausted by her tears, we see the continuity of the struggle. The mechanism of the immune system, designed to protect the self, has inadvertently created a tragedy of the species. It is a reminder that evolution is not always kind, that the path to the present is paved with the quiet, unrecorded sorrows of the past. The wall stands invisible and high, a barrier of proteins and cells, forcing the river of the RH negative blood to carve its own distinct channel through history, separated from the main flow by a dam built of tears and silence, waiting for a future where the wall might finally be breached by understanding. When the grief of the lost children fades into the quiet acceptance of years, and the clan gathers around the embers of the night fire, the human mind begins to weave a net of stories to catch the reason for its sorrow, looking away from the earth that has been so cruel and lifting its gaze to the vast, indifferent perfection of the sky. We are drifting now into the realm of the first great myths, the stories that were old long before they were ever carved into clay tablets or written on scrolls of parchment, stories that attempted to explain the unexplainable mystery of the blood. If the earth rejects the child, the logic goes, then perhaps the child does not belong entirely to the earth. We lie back on the cooling ground, feeling the hard spine of the world beneath us, and look up at the Milky Way, which stretches across the heavens like a spilled river of ghost light. In this era, the sky is not a vacuum. It is a crowded, living place, the domain of the watchers, the silent observers who track the movements of the herds and the turning of the seasons. And here, in the twilight between waking and sleeping, the legend of the Skywalker is born. It is a story whispered in Euskara, in Sumerian, in tongues that have no name, a story of a time when the boundary between the heaven and the earth was porous. The elders speak of the sons of God who looked down and saw that the daughters of men were fair, a narrative that will one day find its way into the 6th chapter of Genesis and the forbidden pages of the Book of Enoch. They tell of a descent, a coming down, a violation of the cosmic order where the celestial mixed with the terrestrial. These beings, known in the Hebrew tradition as the Nephilim, or those who fell, are described not merely as giants or monsters, but as a distinct, powerful lineage that was half human and half something else. It is easy in the drowsy logic of the dream to see how the anomaly of the RH negative blood could be the physical anchor for this myth. If a mother's body fights the life within her as if it were an alien intruder, is it not natural to imagine that the intruder is, in fact, alien, that the blood carries a memory of a different origin? The myth becomes a container for the biological reality. The fallen ones are not necessarily evil in these oldest versions of the story. They are simply incompatible. They are the carriers of a fire that burns too hot for the clay of the earth. We can hear the storyteller's voice dropping to a hush as they recount the traits of these hybrids, their height, their pale skin, their eyes that shone like the morning star, their knowledge of metal and mirrors and the movements of the moon. These are the same traits that will later be associated, rightly or wrongly, with the RH negative phenotype, the high processing, the light sensitivity, the feeling of being a stranger in a strange land. It is a profound psychological balm to believe that one's difference is not a defect but a legacy, to believe that the blood is not missing the monkey protein, but is instead keeping the star protein. As we float through this era of myth-making, we see the rise of the divine right that will plague human history. The blood becomes a status symbol. The blue blood is the blood of the sky, the blood that must be kept pure, the blood that cannot mix with the common clay without tragedy. We see echoes of this in the Sumerian tales of the Anunnaki, the princely offspring of the sky god Anu, who came to earth and established the first priesthoods, the first kingships. They were the intermediaries, the ones who stood between the dust and the stars. Scholars of mythology and religion have long debated whether these stories are memories of a distinct tribe, perhaps a tall, technologically advanced group that migrated into the region and dominated the locals, or if they are purely symbolic. But for the listener by the fire, there is no debate. There is only the feeling in the gut, the resonance in the bone. The story feels true because the body remembers the struggle. The invisible wall of the womb is reimagined as the invisible ladder to the stars. The tragedy of the stillbirth is reframed as the difficulty of housing a god in a mortal vessel. It is a shifting of the burden from medical failure to spiritual destiny. And so, the Skywalker legacy takes root. It is the idea that some humans are merely tourists here, that their true home is above, in the cold, clear silence of the cosmos. This narrative creates a powerful, lonely identity. It separates the us from the them even further, transforming the biological isolation into a cosmic drama. The RH negative individual, looking up at the constellations, feels a strange tug of familiarity, a sense of homesickness for a place they have never been. Is this just the romanticism of the outcast? Or is it, as some fringe theorists suggest, a garbled memory of a genuine intervention? The narrator does not say. We simply observe the power of the story. We watch the smoke rise from the fire, twisting into shapes that look like winged men, like descending chariots, like spirals of DNA. The wind sighs through the canyon, sounding like a choir of lost voices. The connection is made. The blood is no longer just a fluid. It is a story. It is the evidence of a breach. And as the clan sleeps, wrapping themselves in the furs of animals, the dream of the Nephilim drifts through the camp, a shared hallucination that gives meaning to the pain. The sons of God may have vanished, washed away by the great floods or assimilated into the gene pool, but their shadow remains. It remains in the rare, recessive spark that refuses to be extinguished, in the eyes that watch the night sky with a hunger that the day cannot satisfy. The myth settles over the history like a layer of fine dust, softening the sharp edges of the truth, blurring the line between what happened and what was imagined, until the two are indistinguishable. We are left with the lingering sense that the human family tree has a branch that was grafted on from somewhere else, a branch that bears strange fruit, and that the wind shaking the leaves is whispering a name we have almost, but not quite, forgotten. As the eyes descend from the vastness of the Milky Way, they settle back upon the landscape of the self, the quiet, physical geography of the arm resting against the fur. And here we find that the story of the sky has been written into the very parchment of the skin. The climate of the deep past has left its mark, carving the body just as the glaciers carved the valleys. We are observing the physical manifestation of the veins of winter, a transformation born of the long, dark epoch where the sun was a distant pale coin behind a curtain of cloud and ice. In the high latitudes, in the shadow of the ice sheets, the human body had to make a desperate trade. To survive in a world of twilight where the ultraviolet rays were weak and scarce, the skin had to lose its armor, shedding the dark protective melanin that had shielded our ancestors on the scorching savannas of Africa. It was a shedding of the shield to let the light in, a biological hunger for vitamin D that turned the skin pale, translucent, like alabaster or ice. And in this clearing of the canvas, the river within became visible. We look closely at the wrist, turned upward in the firelight, and we see them, the intricate branching tributaries of the veins, pulsing softly beneath the surface. Through the filter of this pale, winter-adapted skin, the blood does not look red. It looks blue. It is a trick of the light, a scattering of the spectrum as it passes through the layers of tissue, but to the observer in a pre-scientific world, it is a visual truth. The river of life appears to run cold and azure, like the meltwater of the glacier, like the deep ocean, like the sky itself. This is the seed of the blue blood legend, the sangre azul that will echo through the corridors of Spanish castles and European courts thousands of years later. It was never a metaphor for nobility. Originally, it was a literal description of a specific physical reality, a trait common among the Basque ancestors and the RH Negative lineages that sheltered in the north. To have blue blood was to be of the old stock, the pale survivors of the ice, distinct from the darker-skinned populations that would later migrate up from the sun-drenched south as the climate warmed. We can feel the coolness of this skin, a surface that seems to hold the chill of the Pleistocene even in the heat of a summer day. There's a delicacy to it, a fragility that belies the resilience of the genetic code within. The skin burns easily under the sun, reddening and blistering, a reminder that it belongs to the shadows, to the mist, to the forests where the canopy breaks the light. It is a skin made for the moon, not the sun. As we trace the blue lines running up the forearm, we are tracing a map of survival. Each vein is a lifeline that carried nutrients through the freezing nights of the Solutrian period, keeping the extremities warm, keeping the fingers nimble enough to sew the hides and knap the flint. It is strange to think that something as simple as the visibility of a vein could create a caste system, a hierarchy of purity that would shape the marriages of kings and queens. The aristocracies of the future will obsess over this, checking the wrists of their betrothed for the telltale azure sign, convinced it marks a lineage untouched by the impure blood of the invaders. They will not understand that they are merely fetishizing an adaptation to a vitamin D deficiency, a clever biological workaround for living in the dark. But here, in the moment of its origin, there is no arrogance, only function. The pale skin is a net cast to catch the faintest glimmer of the sun. It is a testament to the body's incredible ability to mold itself to the demands of the earth. We watch the breath of the sleeper misting in the cold air, and we realize that they are a creature of the winter. Their physiology has been tuned to the cold. The lower basal body temperature, often reported by those with RH negative blood, a consistent, cool 97 degrees rather than the standard 98.6, feels less like an anomaly and more like an energy-saving mode, a way to burn the fire slowly to make the fuel last through the long, hungry famine of the Ice Age. It is the metabolism of the hibernator, the patience of the stone. The veins of winter are not just cosmetic, they are the wiring of a different kind of machine. As the firelight dances over the pale hand, we see the contrast between the red of the flame and the blue of the vessel. A visual tension that mirrors the tension in the blood itself. Red and blue, fire and ice, the positive and the negative. The duality is painted on the body. We drift closer, almost touching the skin, and we sense the quiet hum of the circulation, the old blood moving with its distinct rhythm, carrying the oxygen that fuels the brain, that feeds the eyes that watch the dark. The transparency of the skin makes the human feel vulnerable, exposed, as if the inner workings are too close to the surface, as if the barrier between the soul and the world is too thin. Perhaps this physical transparency is linked to the emotional transparency, the heightened empathy and sensitivity we spoke of before. To be thin-skinned is to feel the world more intensely. To have visible veins is to wear one's life force on the outside. It is a beautiful, haunting aesthetic. The marble skin, the blue map, the deep knowing eyes. It creates an image of ethereal otherness, of someone who has stepped out of a fable. And as the night deepens and the cold settles into the valley, preserving the world in a casing of frost, we understand that this blue blood is the signature of the North, the mark of those who walked into the white silence and refused to leave, allowing the winter to enter them, to bleach the color from their skin and turn their blood to the color of the bruised twilight sky, creating a legacy that will be misunderstood, worshipped, and feared for generations to come, a map of blue rivers flowing towards a destination we have yet to reach. From the visible map of the blue veins, we drift upward to the source of the breath, to the throat and the tongue, where the biological distinctiveness of this lineage finds its voice in the world of sound. The air in the high valleys is thin and reverberant, carrying the echo of a language that is as enigmatic as the blood itself. We are listening to the birth and the persistence of Euskara, the Basque tongue, a linguistic anomaly that defies the family tree of human speech, just as the RH negative factor defies the standard protein markers of the blood. Imagine standing on a ridge in the Pyrenees as the millennia roll by like clouds. Below, in the vast plains of Europe, a great tide is rising. It is the tide of the Indo-Europeans, a massive migration of people and words pouring in from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, bringing with them the roots of almost every language spoken in the West today: English, Spanish, French, German, Russian, Hindi. They bring the words for wheel, for horse, for father, a new vocabulary of conquest and movement that washes over the continent, erasing the older tongues, drowning out the voices of the Neolithic tribes until only silence remains. But here, in the rugged sanctuary of the mountains, the tide breaks against the rock. The water recedes, the island remains. The people of the refuge do not switch to the new tongue. They continue to speak the language of the ice, the language of the stone. To listen to Euskara is to hear a soundscape that has no relatives. It is an orphan in the family of nations, a language isolate that has resisted the erosion of time for at least 6,000 years, and likely far longer. It sounds different to the ear, staccato, rhythmic, filled with the sharp crack of K and T's and TX, sounds that mimic the striking of flint against flint, the snapping of dry wood, the hiss of wind through the gorge. It is a hard language, polished like a river stone, devoid of the softness that will characterize the Romance languages surrounding it. It feels ancient, not in a dusty academic sense, but in a visceral, physical sense, as if the words are being pulled directly from the earth. There is a profound gentleness in observing this refusal to change. It suggests a culture that was complete unto itself, that felt no need to borrow from the outside because its own description of reality was sufficient. We see the elders teaching the children by the fire, passing down words that are literally fossils. Consider the word for axe, aiskora. Linguists and historians have long noted with a sense of wonder that this word is built from the root heights, which means stone. It is a memory trapped in a noun, a definitive proof that this language was fully formed and spoken in the Stone Age, long before the first copper was smelted or the first iron was forged. Every time a modern Basque speaker says the word for axe, they are unknowingly remembering the flint knappers of the Paleolithic, the ancestors who held the rock in their hands and found a name for it. This language acted as a second wall, reinforcing the invisible wall of the immune system. If you could not speak the tongue, you could not enter the circle. You could not understand the rituals, the humor, the subtle cues of the clan. It created a formidable barrier to intermarriage, effectively sealing the gene pool against the dilution of the incoming Indo-Europeans. The language protected the blood, and the blood, in turn, carried the people who preserved the language. They were a closed loop, a self-sustaining system of us. We can feel the safety of this linguistic enclosure. To speak Euskara is to breathe the same air as the ancestors, to shape the mouth around the same vibrations that echoed in the caves of Altamira and Lascaux. It creates a psychological reality where the outside is truly alien. The Basques call themselves Euskaldunak, which simply means possessors of the Euskara language. Their identity is not based on land or borders, but on the possession of the word. And within this word, the world is structured differently. It is an ergative language, meaning the subject is often treated as an active agent acting upon the world in a way that differs from our standard subject-verb-object logic. It frames the universe not as a series of states, but as a series of actions and forces. Perhaps this, too, reflects the mindset of the RH negative survivor, the sentry who must always be acting, always watching, always engaging with the forces of the wild. The language is a code of survival. As we float through the centuries, watching the Roman legions march past the valleys, watching the Visigoths and the Franks, we see them all fail to penetrate the core of this culture. They leave their mark, sure. Latin words seep in. Christianity eventually takes root. But the skeleton of the language remains untouched. It is stubborn. It is proud. It is the audio recording of the prehistory, playing on a loop while the rest of the world changes the track. Why did it survive when the languages of the Etruscans and the Iberians vanished? Perhaps because the people retreated to the mountains, yes, but perhaps also because the language was the only way to explain the mystery of themselves. How else could they describe the feeling of the blood, the intuition, the sensitivity to the light? These experiences required a specific vocabulary, a private dialect of the soul that the crude new languages of the plains could not capture. The language became the vessel for the old knowledge, the oral traditions of the Starwalkers and the goddess Marie who lived in the caves. To lose the language would be to lose the map to their own history. And so they held onto it with a grip of iron. We listened to the lullabies sung to the infants, the ones who survived the immune war, and the melodies are haunting, modal, drifting between the major and minor scales like the wind shifting direction. They are songs of deep memory, songs that comfort the child by telling them they belong to a line that is unbroken. The isolation here is not lonely, it is dense with meaning. It is a crowded solitude filled with the ghosts of the lineage. As the fog rolls into the valley, obscuring the peaks and muffling the sound of the cowbells in the distance, we are left with the sensation that this language is a form of magic, a spell cast to keep the modern world at bay. It is the sonic counterpart to the RH negative blood, recessive, rare, ancient, and inexplicably resilient. It reminds us that there was a time before Babel, a time when the tongues of men were few, and that in this corner of the world, one of those original voices is still speaking, waiting for us to stop talking and finally listen to what the stone has to say. The wind that whispered through the limestone gorges and the high mountain passes begins to change its scent, losing the crisp mineral purity of the snow and picking up a new, heavier fragrance, the acrid metallic tang of wood smoke, charcoal, and smelting ore. We are drifting down from the heights now, descending into the fertile river valleys where the rhythm of human life is undergoing a profound and irreversible transformation. The endless circular time of the hunter-gatherer, marked only by the migration of herds in the phases of the moon, is being replaced by the linear, stacked time of the city builder. Stone is giving way to metal. The age of the cave is over. The age of the temple has begun. We find ourselves in the dawn of the Copper Age, moving into the Bronze, where humanity has learned to tear the bones of the earth from the ground and melt them into new shapes. And in this fireside glow of the first forges, the story of the RH negative blood shifts from a tale of survival to a tale of power. The anomaly is no longer just a biological quirk. It is becoming a political asset, a copper crown, placed upon the heads of those who look and feel different from the masses toiling in the fields. We see the rise of the first true hierarchies, the stratification of society into those who work and those who rule. And it is here, in the cool, shadowed interiors of the first palaces, that the old blood finds a new home. It is a seductive theory, one that aligns with the whispers of the ancients, that the ruling classes, the priestly castes, and the early dynasties were often composed of these distinct lineages, the descendants of the Watchers and the sentry figures we observed in the ice. Their pale skin, which burned in the sun, necessitated a life indoors, behind thick walls and curtains, separated from the sweltering heat of the harvest. Their height, often greater than the average Neolithic farmer whose diet had shrunk to grain and gruel, marked them as physically imposing. Their sensitive eyes, easily overwhelmed by the glare of the Mesopotamian or Egyptian sun, sought the dim, torch-lit sanctuaries of the inner sanctum. Was it biology that pushed them onto the throne, or was it the other way around? Did the people look at these pale, tall, sensitive figures and see the gods of their myths walking among them? The blood became a justification for the divine right, a concept that would shackle human history for thousands of years. The ruler was not merely a strong man, he was a different kind of man. His blood was sacred. It carried the mana, the baraka, the divine spark that kept the chaos at bay. We can feel the weight of this new isolation. The sentry on the ridge was lonely, but he was part of the tribe. The king on the throne is entirely alone, separated from his people by steps of stone, by guards, by the terrifying aura of his own divinity. We watch as the obsession with royal blood begins to twist the family trees of the elite. To keep the power concentrated, to keep the starfire from leaking out into the common earth, the ruling families begin to marry only within their own circle. Brother marries sister, cousin marries cousin, uncle marries niece. We see this in the pharaohs of Egypt, in the Incas of Peru, in the high kings of old Europe. They are trying to preserve the RH negative purity, though they do not have the words for it. They only know that when they mix with the common blood, the magic dilutes, or perhaps the children die. The invisible wall of the womb creates a grim logic. If a king marries a commoner woman who is RH positive, the heirs may perish, taken by the curse of the incompatibility. But if he marries his sister, who shares his recessive blood, the children live. The wall does not rise. And so, the incestuous loops of royalty are reinforced by biological survival, creating a feedback loop that preserves the trait but damages the psyche. We can sense the claustrophobia of the palace, the air heavy with incense and unspoken anxiety. The copper crown is a conductor, yes, but it is also a cage. The ruler is trapped by his own blood. He is the guardian of a genetic legacy that he dares not spill. We see the gleam of copper and gold, metals chosen not just for their beauty, but for their conductivity, their association with the sun and the stars, adorning the bodies of these blue bloods. The metal feels cold against the skin, a heavy reminder of the burden they carry. In the silence of the throne room, the king sits motionless, his mind perhaps racing with the same hyper-vigilance of his ancestor on the ice. But now, instead of scanning for wolves, he scans for assassins, for shifting loyalties, for the subtle currents of court intrigue. The intuition, the sixth sense of the RH negative lineage, is repurposed for politics. He reads the room not for survival of the body, but for survival of the crown. It is a colder, sharper application of the gift. The empathy we sensed in the cave is often hardened here, calcified by the necessity of rule, turned into a piercing gaze that makes his subjects tremble. He sees through me, they whisper. He knows my thoughts. And perhaps he does, in a way. He reads the micro-expressions, the shifts in posture, the smell of fear, processing the data with that ancient, high-speed nervous system. We drift through the great city-states of Sumer, Ur, Eridu, Nippur, and we see the ziggurats rising like artificial mountains, stairways to the sky built by a people desperate to reconnect with the above. The priesthoods here are exclusive, hereditary, guarding the secret knowledge of astronomy and mathematics. Are they, too, reservoirs of the old blood? It seems likely. The separation between the sacred and the profane is absolute. The blood is the barrier. As the era of the hunter fades into myth, the era of the king solidifies, and the enigma of the RH negative factor becomes institutionalized. It is no longer just a way to survive the cold, it is the license to rule. But there is a melancholy in this elevation. We look at the face of the golden mask, the funeral effigy of a young king who died too soon, perhaps from the genetic complications of generations of inbreeding. and we see the sadness in the eyes. They have traded the freedom of the open tundra for the golden shackles of the state. They have traded the brotherhood of the campfire for the worship of the crowd. The blood has bought them the world, but it has cost them their connection to it. They are the skywalkers grounded, forced to govern a species they feel increasingly separate from. And as the sun sets over the Euphrates, turning the river to a ribbon of molten copper, we feel the deep, quiet tragedy of the crown, a symbol of a circle that is closed too tightly, choking the life it was meant to protect, preserving the blood in a vessel of gold that is slowly, beautifully, suffocating the soul within, while the common people below look up and wonder at the strange, pale gods who watch them from the high windows, never knowing that the gods are just as afraid of the dark as they are, prisoners of a biology they can neither understand nor escape. From the heavy golden brow of the king, our gaze drops to the object he holds in his pale hand, a staff of authority carved from cedar or cast in bronze, and there, winding its way up the wood, is the shape that will define the spiritual landscape of this lineage for eons: the serpent. We are drifting now into the realm of the serpent and the eagle, a symbolic duality that appears with uncanny regularity wherever the old blood seems to have concentrated. It is a pattern that stretches across oceans and epochs, a visual language spoken by the pyramid builders of the Nile, the ziggurat priests of Babylon, and the temple architects of Mesoamerica. Why the serpent? In the hush of the temple, watching the torchlight flicker against the relief of a cobra with its hood flared, we feel the ancient resonance of this creature. The serpent is the guardian of the earth's secrets. It moves without legs, sliding through the cracks and crevices of the underworld, dwelling in the cool, dark places where the sun does not reach, much like the ancestors who sheltered in the caves of the Pyrenees. It sheds its skin, emerging renewed and glossy, a living symbol of rebirth and the cyclical nature of time, a promise that the bloodline can survive even when the individual fades. But there is something deeper here, a visual rhyme that perhaps the ancients understood intuitively, or perhaps saw in a vision we have forgotten. Look closely at the staff of Hermes, the caduceus, or the rod of Asclepius, symbols of healing and medicine that persist to this day. Two serpents intertwining around a central rod, spiraling in a double helix. It is a shape that mirrors the very structure of life, the DNA molecule that holds the code of the blood. Is it possible that the Watchers, the ancestors with the heightened senses and the deep intuition, perceived the spiral nature of life long before the microscope? It is a gentle scholarly uncertainty, a question that floats in the incense-heavy air. Did they worship the serpent because they knew it represented the microscopic coil that made them different? Or was it simply that the snake, with its cold blood and its venom that could both kill and cure, felt like a kindred spirit to a people whose own blood held the power of life in the tragedy of the invisible wall? The venom of the snake and the antibodies of the mother, both are potent, invisible forces that defend the organism. The connection feels visceral. We see the uraeus, the rearing cobra on the headdress of the pharaoh, positioned right over the third eye, the pineal gland, suggesting that the serpent wisdom is the source of the ruler's vision. It is the serpent of wisdom, the Naga of the Hindu traditions, the guardian of the treasure hidden in the deep. But the serpent is only half the story. As we lift our eyes from the ground, we hear the screech of the raptor, the beat of heavy wings against the thermal currents, the eagle, the hawk, the falcon. If the serpent is the blood of the earth, the bird is the memory of the sky. It represents the skywalker aspect of the lineage, the origin story that points to the stars. The bird sees everything from above. It possesses the sentry's vision, amplified to a godlike perspective. In ancient Sumer, the gods are often depicted with wings. In Egypt, Horus, the hawk-headed god, rules the living. The bird is the freedom that the earthbound serpent lacks. And the most profound symbol of all, the one that unites these two opposing forces, is the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs, Kukulkan of the Mayans. Here, in the humid jungles of the Americas, far from the ice of Europe, the story repeats. a god who brings civilization, who opposes human sacrifice, who is described as tall, bearded, and pale-skinned, a stranger from across the sea. The feathered serpent is the impossible union of the earth and the sky, the reptile and the bird, the heavy red blood of the primate and the star fire of the anomaly. It is the perfect totem for the RH paradox, a being that belongs to the ground, but remembers the flight. We can feel the tension of this duality in the artifacts they left behind. The gold amulets, the jade carvings, the painted pottery, they are obsessed with the transformation of the snake into the bird. It is the story of the soul trying to escape the heavy gravity of the biological trap. We see the brotherhood of the snake whispered about in secret societies, a lineage of knowledge keepers who pass the torch from generation to generation, guarding the dragon blood. The dragon, after all, is just a serpent that has grown wings. It is the ultimate expression of the RH negative archetype, powerful, solitary, hoarding its treasure, the purity of the blood, and breathing fire, the intensity of the spirit. As we drift through the ruins of these ancient civilizations, running our hands over the cool stone of the altars, we notice how the serpent motif often guards the entrances, the thresholds. It is a warning and a welcome. Only those with the wisdom may enter. It is a reflection of the immune system's gatekeeping. The serpent is the antibody. It strikes at the intruder. We see the great mounds of North America, shaped like giant snakes swallowing eggs, and we wonder if they are maps of the womb, monuments to the fertility struggles of the lineage. The Serpent Mound in Ohio, silent under the grass, speaks of a people who wanted to imprint this symbol onto the very crust of the planet. And in the crests of the royal families of Europe, the eagle spreads its wings, often double-headed, looking east and west, the master of the horizon. The symbols are not decorative, they are declarative. They are saying, we are the union of the below and the above. We are the snake that knows the earth and the eagle that knows the star. The feeling of the serpent, that smooth, dry, cool scales moving over skin, evokes a shiver of recognition. It is a creature that changes without dying, just as the bloodline has changed its shape from hunter to king to priest, shedding the skin of the era but keeping the essence of the genetic code intact. The eagle's cry pierces the silence, a lonely, high-pitched sound that echoes the isolation of the mountaintop. Together, they form a seal, a lock on the history of the blood. The listener, floating in this river of symbols, might feel a strange affinity for one or the other, the grounded wisdom of the snake or the detached observation of the bird. Perhaps that affinity is itself a memory, a resonance with the old blood that flows through the listener's own veins, or simply a recognition of the universal human struggle to reconcile our animal nature with our spiritual hunger. The serpent and the eagle are not at war. They are dancing. They are the double helix spinning in the dark, the positive and the negative, the yes and the no, weaving the complex, fragile tapestry of human life. And as the image of the feathered serpent fades into the jungle mists, leaving only the sound of rain on broad leaves, we are left with the sense that these symbols were left behind as breadcrumbs, clues for a time when we would have the eyes to see them not just as idols, but as diagrams of our own divided heart, written in the language of scales and feathers, waiting for the children of the anomaly to remember who they are. The sound of the jungle rain fades, replaced by a deeper, more rhythmic thrumming, a sound that is both a heartbeat and a breath, the eternal, crashing cadence of the ocean. We have walked the high mountains, we have sat on the thrones of the desert, but now the camera of our memory drifts toward the edge of the world, to the gray, heaving interface where the land ends and the unknown begins. The air grows cool and salty, tasting of brine and kelp, and the horizon stretches out, a flat, infinite line that beckons the restless spirit. It is here, in the echo of the sea, that the story of the RH negative bloodline finds its most elusive and haunting chapter. There is a theory, whispered by geneticists who study the Atlantic modal haplotype, that the spread of this distinct lineage was not a march across the land, but a voyage across the water. We are looking at the Atlantic facade, the rim of Europe that faces the setting sun, From the cliffs of Galicia to the coasts of Brittany, from the emerald shores of Ireland to the rocky inlets of the Basque Country. These populations, separated by hundreds of miles of water, share a genetic kinship, a bond of blood that links them more closely to each other than to the neighbors at their backs. It is as if the sea was not a barrier, but a highway, a liquid road that connected a network of clans who knew the secrets of the tides. We drift back to the turbulent close of the Bronze Age, around 1200 BC, a time when the great empires of the Mediterranean, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Egyptians, were collapsing under the weight of drought, earthquake, and war. And out of this chaos, appearing like ghosts from the mist, came the Sea Peoples. Historians still debate who they were: the Shurden, the Peliset, the Checker. Names that appear on the victory stele of Ramses III, described as a confederation of warriors who came from the islands in the midst of the sea. They were tall, they wore horned helmets, and they possessed a fierce, desperate energy. Were they the displaced carriers of the RH negative blood, fleeing a homeland that was being swallowed by the rising waters or the crumbling of the old world? It is a compelling image. A fleet of ships with bird-headed prows, carrying families who had no land left to stand on, looking for a new shore. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were migrants, refugees of a catastrophe we have forgotten. The Egyptians noted their foreign nature, their strange armor, their women and children following in ox carts. They were a people on the move. And when they vanished from the historical record, they didn't just disappear. They assimilated, perhaps settling in Sardinia, giving it their name, Shurden, in Sicily, in the Levant, seeding the coastlines with their genetic signature. But the echo goes deeper than the Mediterranean. We cast our gaze further west, into the open Atlantic, to the lonely archipelago of the Canary Islands. Here, before the Spanish conquest in the 15th century, lived the Guanches. They are one of history's great anomalies. They were a people living in a Stone Age solitude, yet they were often described as tall, fair-skinned, blue-eyed, and possessing reddish-blonde hair. And most startlingly, modern genetic analysis of their remains reveals that they had an incredibly high frequency of RH negative blood. They were a living museum of the ancient European hunter-gatherer lineage, preserved on volcanic rocks in the middle of the ocean. How did they get there? They had no boats when the Europeans arrived. They had forgotten the art of sailing, or perhaps they had never known it, having been stranded there when the sea levels rose and cut them off from the mainland. The silence of the Guanches is profound. They lived in caves, they mummified their dead, they built step pyramids that mirrored those in the Americas and Mesopotamia. They are a missing link, a piece of the puzzle that suggests a vast maritime culture that once spanned the ocean, a culture of which the Basques, the Berbers, and the Celts are merely the surviving fragments. This brings us, gently and inevitably, to the shadow of Atlantis. We do not need to envision a city of sci-fi crystal towers. We need only remember the geological reality of Doggerland, the vast landmass that connected Britain to Europe before the ice melted and the North Sea drowned it. The trauma of the flood is written into the human psyche. For a people living on the edge of the ice, the end of the glacial maximum meant the rising of the water. Their hunting grounds, their sacred groves, their homes were slowly, inexorably consumed by the blue wall. The RH negative lineage, concentrated in these Western refugees, would have been the first to witness this loss. Is the myth of Atlantis, the great civilization swallowed by the sea, a garbled memory of this ancestral tragedy? A memory of a time when the old blood lived on a land that no longer exists? Plato spoke of Atlantis as being beyond the Pillars of Hercules, out in the deep Atlantic. It feels less like a fantasy and more like a mourning song for a lost geography. The survivors became the sailors. We see the Basque whalers of later centuries, men who ventured all the way to Newfoundland long before Columbus, navigating the freezing, foggy waters with an eerie confidence. They seemed to know the ocean not as an enemy, but as a parent. They had salt in their veins. The blood of the R negative seems to carry a restlessness, a feeling of not belonging to the land, perhaps because the land they belong to is gone. We watch the waves crash against the prow of a wooden ship, the spray soaking the skin of the navigator. He looks at the stars, the same stars his ancestors watched from the cave entrance, and he steers by a map that is etched into his intuition. The ocean is vast and indifferent, yet he feels a rhythm in the swell that matches the rhythm of his own circulation. The echo of the sea is the sound of dispersion. It is the story of how the anomaly spread from the isolated pockets of the refuge to the far corners of the earth, carried by wind and current. We can feel the dampness of the fog, the heavy, humid cloak that hides the destination. There is a melancholy in the sound of the gull crying overhead, a sound of departure. The sea peoples burned the cities of the Bronze Age not out of malice, perhaps, but out of the desperation of those who have lost their anchor. They were the orphans of the deluge. And as the ship disappears over the curve of the horizon, sliding down the back of the world, we are left with the sense that the history we know is just the surface of the water, and that the true history, the history of the blood, lies beneath the waves, in the sunken valleys and the drowned plains where the ancestors once walked, leaving a legacy that washes up on our shores in the strange recessive traits of a child born thousands of miles and thousands of years away from the catastrophic flood that started it all. The water remembers. And deep in the veins of the mariner, the blood remembers too, pulling him always back to the edge, back to the sea, searching for the home that sank beneath the waves. We withdraw from the salt spray of the Atlantic, the roar of the ocean fading into the steady rhythmic swoosh of the breath entering and leaving the lungs. We are returning to the vessel itself, to the quiet, complex machinery of the human body. But this time, we are looking deeper than the skin or the blood type. We are looking at the fire that burns within the furnace. In the standard model of human biology, there is a set point, a thermal constant that we are told defines our species, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. It is the temperature of the tropical ape, the heat required to keep the enzymes firing in the lush, warm environments of our evolutionary birth. But for the carrier of the RH negative blood, the dial is often set lower. We place a hand against the forehead of the sleeper, and we feel a coolness that is not the chill of death, but the cool efficiency of a different kind of life. It is the cold fire, a metabolic signature that hums at 97 degrees or sometimes even lower. In a modern doctor's office, this might be dismissed as a minor anomaly, a low normal, or perhaps a sign of a sluggish thyroid. But here, in the long memory of the species, it tells a different story. It speaks of the ice. Imagine the body not as a heater trying to combat the cold, but as a system designed to harmonize with it. In the deep freeze of the Paleolithic winter, when calories were scarce and the wind stripped the heat from the skin within minutes, a body that burned too hot was a body that starved. To maintain a high core temperature requires fuel, constant, high-quality fuel. But the ancestors of the RH negative lineage, trapped in the glaciated refuges of Europe, adapted by turning down the thermostat. They evolved a metabolism of preservation, a hibernation mode that allowed them to survive on less food, to endure longer periods of famine, to move through the freezing world without burning out. It is a biological patience. The cold fire burns blue and steady, consuming the oxygen and the glucose with a miserly precision. This might explain why, even today, many with this blood type report a strange intolerance to heat, a feeling of wilting when the temperature rises, while finding a strange, invigorating clarity in the crisp air of autumn or the dead of winter. Their bodies remember the glaciers. They come alive when the world cools down. But the fire is not just thermal, it is electrical. We peer into the nervous system, that web of copper lightning that threads through the spine and the brain, and we find another layer of the enigma. The RH negative system often seems to run on a higher voltage. It is a concept difficult to quantify in a lab, but undeniable in the lived experience. It is the feeling of a nervous system that has no insulation, a raw exposure to the electromagnetic currents of the world. We see this in the strange reactions to anesthesia, where the standard dose is often not enough, or perhaps too much, the body reacting unpredictably to the chemical shutdown. It suggests a brain that fights to stay on, a sentry that refuses to leave its post even under the influence of sedation. And then there is the static. The way watches seem to stop on the wrists of certain individuals, the way streetlights seem to flicker as they pass. Anecdotal, yes, the stuff of urban legend, but so persistent, so widespread among this specific demographic that it feels like a folklore trying to describe a physics we do not yet understand. Is it possible that the lack of the RH protein alters the electrical conductivity of the blood itself? That the red blood cells, without that surface antigen, hold a different charge, creating a subtle personal electromagnetic field that interacts with the environment in unusual ways? We drift through the quiet hum of the body, listening to the crackle of the synapses, and it feels like standing under high-tension power lines, a sense of potential energy, vibrating, waiting to discharge. And what of the armor? The invisible wall we spoke of earlier, the one that rejects the fetus, is not a wall that only faces inward. It is a fortress that faces the world. There is a fascinating scientifically documented resilience in the RH negative blood against certain parasites, specifically Toxoplasma gondii. This microscopic invader, carried by cats and found in soil, infects a vast portion of the human population, embedding itself in the brain and subtly altering behavior, slowing reaction times, increasing risk-taking. But the RH negative blood seems to repel it. The drawbridge is up. The old blood does not welcome the guest. Why? Perhaps because in the caves of the refuge, where humans lived in close quarters with the early domesticated wolves and wildcats, resistance to zoonotic parasites was a matter of life and death. Or perhaps it is deeper, a fundamental biological xenophobia, a cellular system that is hypervigilant against anything other. This resistance creates a mind that is uniquely its own, untouched by the subtle manipulations of the parasite. It preserves the self with a fierce chemical jealousy. We can see the trade-offs of this design. The cold fire preserves energy, but it can lead to lethargy in the modern heated world. The high-voltage nervous system detects threats, but it can burn out, leading to the anxiety and the sensory overwhelm that so many report. The immune armor protects against infection, but it attacks the unborn. It is a package deal, a suite of traits forged in a specific crucible, optimized for a world that no longer exists. The RH negative individual is like a deep-sea creature brought to the surface, or a snow leopard in a tropical zoo, a masterpiece of adaptation living in the wrong context. They walk among us, their skin cool to the touch, their eyes scanning for a predator that has been extinct for 10,000 years, their blood rejecting the common parasites of the crowd. They are walking time capsules. As we watch the sleeper turn over, seeking the cool side of the pillow, we understand that these symptoms, the low temperature, the electrical sensitivity, the strange immunities, are not random glitches. They are the functioning components of a survival machine that was the apex of design in the year 40,000 BC. They are the hum of an engine built for the ice. The cold fire is still burning, waiting for the long winter to return, and until it does, the carrier must live with the strange sensation of being an engine idling too high, a furnace burning too cool, a being of the frost living in the age of the sun. The silence of the room seems to deepen around this realization, the shadows lengthening as we accept that the body is not just a vessel for the present, but a monument to the past, and that the coldness of the skin is just the memory of the wind that once tried and failed to blow this flame out. The cool blue fire that burns within the singular body does not stay contained. It radiates outward, shaping the laws of the house, the village, and finally, the throne room, creating a rigid architecture of blood that will imprison the lineage for centuries. We drift now from the physiological reality of the cold fire to the sociological tragedy of the forbidden union, moving from the silence of the cell to the hushed velvet-draped corridors of the royal court. It is here, in the high stone keeps of Europe and the gilded palaces of the ancient Near East, that the biological imperative of the RH negative blood transforms into the iron law of succession. We must remember the terror of the invisible wall, the mother's immune system turning against her own child if the father is different. In a pre-scientific world, this pattern of death in the nursery was not understood as a protein incompatibility. It was seen as a divine judgment, a sign that the union was unequal or impure. If a king of the old blood took a wife from the new people, the RH positives who surrounded them, and their heirs died one by one, turned yellow and cold by the mother's antibodies, the conclusion was inescapable. The gods forbade the mixing. The starfire could not be poured into a clay vessel without breaking it. And so the decree was whispered, then written, then etched in stone. Marry your own. This is the hidden biological root of the obsession with royal incest. We look with horror today at the family trees of the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Habsburgs in Europe, the Incas in the Andes, trees that look less like branching oaks and more like twisted vines choking themselves, circles within circles. But if we view it through the lens of the RH Enigma, the logic shifts from arrogance to desperation. They were trying to keep the children alive. They were trying to preserve the blue blood, that visible azure network of veins we saw by the fire, because they believed it held the mandate of heaven. To dilute it was to lose the throne. To mix it was to invite death. We see the Spanish aristocracy, the original sangre azul, holding up their pale arms to show the veins, proving they had no Moorish or Jewish blood, populations that, in their view, carried the heat of the South, the positive blood that would war with their own. It was a eugenics program born of survival anxiety. But nature demands flow. It abhors the stagnant pool. And here lies the great slow-motion tragedy of the forbidden union. By closing the circle to protect the blood, they inadvertently trapped the errors. We walk through the gallery of the Habsburgs, looking at the portraits painted by Velázquez and Titian. We see the long, pale faces, the heavy, drooping eyelids, and the infamous Habsburg jaw, the prognathism that made it difficult for the king to chew, to speak, to close his mouth. This deformity is the physical scar of the RH negative isolation. It is what happens when the sentry's vigilance turns into paranoia, when the refuge of stone becomes a prison of gold. They saved the blood type. Yes, Charles II of Spain was certainly of the lineage. But they destroyed the vessel. The cold fire burned so intensely within the closed loop that it consumed the mind and the body. We can feel the stifling atmosphere of these courts, the air heavy with the scent of lavender and rotting tapestry. The silence is different here than it was in the cave. In the cave, the silence was alert, listening for the wolf. Here, the silence is fearful, listening for the cough of a sickly prince, for the whisper of a barren queen. The forbidden union was the union with the outside world, the union with the commoner, which was strictly taboo. They locked the gates. They drew the velvet curtains. They lived in a twilight of their own making, convinced they were preserving the Nephilim spark, the divine right to rule. And yet, there is a strange, haunting romance to this self-destruction. They believed they were different species. They believed, perhaps truly, that their souls were of a different texture, that their intuitive, high-voltage nervous systems could not harmonize with the dullness of the masses. We hear the rumors of the fairy blood in the folklore of the British Isles, the Tuatha De Danann who retreated into the hollow hills to avoid mixing with the invading Milesians. It is the same story. The forbidden union is the refusal to assimilate. It is the choice to fade away rather than to blend in. We see the melancholy of the elves in Tolkien's mythology, a direct echo of this European memory, a fair, tall, starlight-loving people who are leaving the world because they can no longer endure its heaviness. The arch-negative bloodline feels this weight. The forbidden union laws were a desperate attempt to build a dam against the rising tide of the arch-positive majority, to keep a small, dry island where the old ways, the old senses, the old magic could survive. But the dam inevitably leaks. We watch the secret trysts in the garden, the bastard children born of illicit affairs who, ironically, often possessed the vigor and health that the legitimate heirs lacked because the fresh blood had strengthened them. The royal bastard is a trope of history, often described as more kingly than the king. Perhaps this is nature's way of correcting the mistake, of forcing the fresh air into the sealed room. But officially, the line held. The blue blood remained the prerequisite for power. Even in the 19th and 20th centuries, the royal disease of hemophilia, linked to the X chromosome but exacerbated by the shallow gene pool, ravaged the houses of Victoria and Romanov. It was the blood rebelling against its confinement. The cold fire had become a fever. As we stand in the crypt of the Escorial, surrounded by the marble tombs of the Spanish kings, we feel the immense weight of this genetic gamble. They bet everything on the purity of the blood, and in the end, they lost. The dynasties collapsed, not from invasion, but from exhaustion. The enigma could not be hoarded. It was meant to be a spice in the human soup, not the whole meal. The forbidden union created a lineage of lonely, fragile gods who sat on golden chairs while their bodies crumbled, and yet the trait survived. It slipped out of the palaces, carried by the second sons, the exiled daughters, the illegitimate offspring, flowing back into the common river of humanity where it could hide, safe in its recessiveness, waiting to resurface in a musician, a nurse, a restless dreamer in a modern city who has no idea that their feeling of isolation, their cool skin, and their strange intuitive dreams are the scattered inheritance of a crown that melted long ago. The velvet rope has been cut, but the memory of the separation remains, a quiet, "do not touch," whispered in the code of the DNA, a lingering hesitation to merge, a ghost of the royal decree that once declared the blood too sacred to share. The velvet ropes of the royal courts have fallen, the heavy gold of the crowns has been melted down to coin and wire, and the great stone walls of the refuge have long since crumbled into the scree of the mountain slopes, yet the separation persists. It has migrated from the geography of the land to the geography of the mind. We drift now away from the grand stage of history, away from the kings and the high priests, and settle into the quiet, private interior of the individual soul, the outsider's gaze. This is the psychological echo of the RH Negative Enigma, the feeling that remains when the physical barriers are gone, but the invisible wall still stands, transparent and impenetrable between the self and the world. It is a sensation familiar to many who carry this lineage, a persistent, low-level hum of displacement that whispers, "I am here, but I am not of here." We float into a room, any room in any century, where a celebration is taking place. The fire is roaring, the music is loud, the laughter of the group rises in a warm, chaotic wave. But there is one figure standing slightly apart, perhaps near the window, perhaps in the shadow of the doorframe. They are smiling, they are participating, but behind their eyes there is a deep, cool stillness. They are watching the party rather than being in it. It is the ghost of the century again, that ancient ancestor who stood on the ridge while the tribe slept, but now there is no wolf to watch for. There is only the habit of vigilance, the biological imperative to observe, to analyze, to remain slightly detached so that the perimeter can be held. This detachment is often misunderstood as shyness or arrogance or coldness, but it is none of these. It is simply a different focal length. The RH negative mind, with its heightened sensitivity and its high-voltage nervous system, often finds the raw, unfiltered chaos of human intimacy overwhelming. To survive the noise, it steps back. It builds a glass wall. We can trace this feeling of otherness through the folklore of the hearth in the stories told by grandmothers while the wind rattled the shutters. The myth of the changeling is perhaps the most heartbreaking attempt to explain this psychological drift. The parents look at their child, pale, serious, staring at the dust motes in a shaft of light with an intensity that seems unhuman. And they whisper that the fair folk came in the night, took the human baby, and left one of their own in its place. The changeling does not cry like other babies. It watches. It seems to have old eyes. It seems to be waiting for its true family to return. Is this folklore, or is it a primitive diagnosis of the RH negative temperament? The child feels the disconnect, the parents sense the difference, and the story bridges the gap. The tragedy of the changeling is not that they are a monster, but that they are lonely. They are a creature of a different frequency, trying to tune into a world that broadcasts on a wavelength they cannot quite catch. This feeling often persists into adulthood, manifesting as a profound, inexplicable homesickness, a Fernweh or Sehnsucht, for a place the person has never visited, perhaps a place that does not exist on any map. It is a longing for the unbroken circle we left behind in the deep past, or perhaps a longing for the star home promised by the Nephilim myths. We watch the outsider walking through a crowded city street. The neon lights reflect in their eyes, the noise of the traffic washes over them, but they move through it like a diver moving through water, sealed in their own atmosphere. They are often the seekers, the ones who are drawn to the edges of knowledge, to astronomy, to genealogy, to the metaphysical. They are trying to solve the riddle of themselves. Why do I feel like a tourist on my own planet? Why does the violence of the world hurt me physically? Why do I feel a kinship with the night sky that I do not feel with my own neighbors? Gentle scholarly uncertainty surrounds this topic, as mainstream psychology does not recognize blood type as a personality determinant, yet the anecdotal data is a rushing river that cannot be ignored. Thousands of people with RH negative blood report the same cluster of feelings: the sense of having a specific mission that they cannot remember, the feeling of time moving differently for them, the sense of being monitored or watched by something unseen. Perhaps this paranoia is just the sentry's instinct turned inward, the mind scanning itself because the tundra is empty. Or perhaps it is a valid intuition, a recognition that they are indeed carriers of a rare and precious code that nature has fought to preserve against the odds. The outsider's gaze is not without its gifts. The distance offers perspective. The one who stands apart sees the patterns that the crowd ignores. They are the artists, the writers, the visionaries who can describe the human condition specifically because they stand slightly outside of it. They are the mirror that reflects the world back to itself. We see them in the quiet hours of the early morning, the witching hour, when the RH negative mind is often most active, writing, painting, thinking, while the rest of the hemisphere sleeps. They are comfortable in the silence. The silence is their oldest companion. It is the silence of the cave, the silence of the ocean, the silence of the space between the stars. But the loneliness is real. It is a cool, heavy stone carried in the chest. It is the feeling of looking through a window at a warm, lit room where a family is eating dinner and knowing that the door is locked, or that you have lost the key, or that even if you entered, you would still be speaking a language they do not understand. As we drift deeper into this headspace, we realize that this alienation is the final protective mechanism of the blood. If the RH negative lineage felt fully at home, fully integrated, they might have dissolved completely into the great genetic melting pot eons ago. The feeling of not belonging kept them moving, kept them searching, kept them marrying their own, kept the lineage distinct. It was a psychological quarantine that reinforced the biological one. Nature, in its cold wisdom, made them lonely so that they would survive. And so the outsider stands at the window, watching the rain fall on the glass, seeing the reflection of their own pale face and the dark, searching eyes that look back, asking the oldest question of all: who am I? The answer is not in the room. It is in the rain, in the wind, in the deep vibrating memory of the blood that flows silently through the blue veins. A river that has traveled a very long way to be here, carrying a message that perhaps can only be heard in the solitude of the gaze, a message that says, you are the witness, you are the one who remembers, you are the bridge. And as the rain blurs the city lights into streaks of gold and red, the outsider turns away from the window, carrying the heavy, precious burden of their difference back into the shadows, a solitary orbit in a crowded universe, content for a moment to be the moon that watches the earth rather than the earth itself. The glass wall of the outsider separates the self from the noise of the crowd, but it does not block the signal. In fact, It seems to amplify a different kind of transmission, a frequency that travels beneath the audible range of the world. We move now from the feeling of being apart to the feeling of being deeply, frighteningly connected, not to the social games of the tribe, but to the raw emotional and physical reality of the life around us. This is the domain of the silent knowledge, the phenomenon of intuition and heightened empathy that trails the RH Negative bloodline like the wake behind a ship. In the modern world, we might call this psychic ability or telepathy, dressing it in the cheap costumes of the carnival fortune teller. But let us strip away the neon and the crystal balls and return to the silence of the Paleolithic night. Here, before the invention of complex language, before the lie existed, survival depended on the ability to read the unseen. The sentry on the ridge did not need words to know that the wolf was watching. He felt the gaze on the back of his neck. The mother in the cave did not need a cry to know her child was sickening. She felt the shift in the infant's rhythm against her own chest. This knowing was not magic. It was data. It was the processing of 1,000 tiny subliminal cues, the shift of a shadow, the scent of fear in a bead of sweat, the microscopic dilation of a pupil, calculated by a brain that was wired for high-speed threat detection. The RH negative lineage, honed in the isolation of the refuge, seems to have kept this ancient channel open, while the rest of humanity slowly let it close, trading the raw instinct for the comfort of spoken words. We drift into the quiet living room of the present day, where the descendant of that lineage sits reading a book. Suddenly, they stop. The air in the room has changed. A thought enters their mind, clear and sharp as a bell. Something is wrong. And miles away, the phone begins to ring. This is the precognitive echo, the feeling of the event arriving before the news of the event. Is it supernatural? Or is it a form of quantum entanglement, a biological radio that we have forgotten how to tune? The silent knowledge manifests most intensely as a built-in lie detector. We see the RH negative individual standing in a conversation, nodding politely while the other person speaks, but inside, the alarm is ringing. They know the words are false. They can feel the dissonance between the speaker's voice and their intent, a physical friction that grates on the nerves. It is an exhausting gift. To see the truth behind the mask is to be constantly disappointed, constantly wary. It reinforces the invisible wall, making trust difficult, because the social lubricants of white lies and polite fictions, the glue that holds civilization together, do not work on them. They see the bone beneath the skin. This piercing insight is likely the source of the witch archetype in medieval history. We imagine the wise woman at the edge of the village, the one who knew which herbs cured the fever, who knew who was stealing the grain, who knew the weather before the clouds gathered. She was likely RH negative, carrying the old blood and the old eyes. Her knowledge was dangerous because it could not be explained. And so the fear rose up, and the fires were lit. The persecution of the witch was, in a grim sense, a persecution of a specific neurotype, a culling of the highly sensitive. But the knowledge is not just mental, it is physical. We touch upon the phenomenon of the electric hands. Many with this blood type report a strange heat or vibration in their palms, a sensation that urges them to touch, to heal, to fix. We watch the mother rubbing the back of a sick child, or the friend holding the hand of the grieving, and there's a transfer of energy that feels palpable. Is this the cold fire discharging? Is it the high-voltage nervous system acting as a capacitor? We see the prevalence of RH negative individuals in the nursing and healing professions, drawn there not just by compassion, but by a biological imperative to balance the energy of the room. But this empathy is a double-edged sword. To feel the pain of others as if it were your own is a heavy burden. The thin skin we observed earlier allows the emotions of the world to leak in. The RH negative person walks into a hospital or a funeral home and is physically struck by the weight of the air. They absorb the grief, the fear, the anger of strangers. They are sin-eaters of the emotional world, filtering the toxins of the tribe through their own bloodstream. This often leads to the need for deep retreat, for the hibernation of the bedroom, where they can discharge the static and return to their own baseline. They are not antisocial, they are simply oversaturated. We can feel the texture of this silence. It is not empty, it is thick with information. It is the silence of the hunter who is listening to the forest. It is the silence of the mother who is listening to the womb. The silent knowledge suggests that language is a clumsy tool, a late addition to the human toolkit that has obscured the older, deeper ways of connecting. The RH Negative lineage remembers the time before Babel. They remember the telepathy of the herd, the shared mind of the flock. And in the modern world, this memory manifests as a profound loneliness for a kind of communication that no longer exists, a desire to be understood without speaking, to be known without explaining. We see them looking into the eyes of animals, dogs, cats, horses, and finding a peace there that they rarely find with humans. The animal does not lie. The animal broadcasts its intent clearly. The connection is instant and ancient. It is a return to the unbroken circle, a momentary repair of the rift. As we float through the quiet hours of the night, watching the sleeper toss and turn, perhaps dreaming of tsunamis or flying or wars they never fought, we understand that the silent knowledge is the restless spirit of the DNA trying to make sense of a world that has gone deaf. The intuition is a survival map for a territory that has been paved over. But the map is still accurate. The warnings are still true. The voice that speaks in the silence is the voice of the ancestor who survived the ice because they listened to the wind. It is a reminder that we are not just thinking machines. We are feeling antennas, capable of receiving signals from the earth and from each other that science has yet to measure. The blood listens. The veins hum. And for those who carry the enigma, the challenge is not to shut out the noise, but to trust the silence, to accept the knowing as a lantern given to them by the dark past to help them navigate the twilight of the present, a quiet, flickering light that reveals the hidden shape of things if only they have the courage to look. The silence of the intuitive mind, deep and resonant as it is, eventually meets the sharp, sterile clarity of the modern lens. We are moving now from the candlelit room of the wise woman to the cold, fluorescent hum of the laboratory. Yet the mystery does not vanish under the light. It only sharpens, revealing the jagged edges of a puzzle that biology cannot quite fit together. We have arrived in the mid-20th century, a blink of an eye in the timeline of the species, where the shadow of the helix finally becomes visible to the naked eye of science. It is here, amidst the smell of antiseptic and the quiet whir of the centrifuge, that the ancient story of the blood is finally given a name. We watch the hands of Karl Landsteiner and Alexander Wiener in 1940, moving with the precision of watchmakers as they mix the red fluid of the rhesus macaque with the serum of rabbits, and then, crucially, with the blood of humans. They are looking for a reaction, a clumping, a sign of kinship. And they find it. For the vast majority of humanity, the 85%, the blood reacts. It recognizes the monkey protein. It says, yes, I know this, we are kin. The positive flag is raised. The link to the primate ancestor is confirmed in the glass dish. But then there's the silence, the reaction that does not happen. For the 15%, the blood remains smooth, liquid, indifferent. It stares back at the monkey serum with a blank refusal. I do not know this, it says. I am not of that. This moment in the lab is the scientific equivalent of the sentry looking out at the empty tundra. It is the discovery of the gap. For the first time, the negative is defined not by what it has, but by what it lacks. The D antigen, a complex protein folded onto the surface of the cell like a tiny castle, is simply missing. Gone. Deleted from the code. Science is uncomfortable with deletions that persist. In the brutal economy of evolution, a mutation that causes mothers to kill their own babies should have been wiped out in 100 generations. It is a fitness cost too high to pay. And yet, here it is, thriving in the Basques, in the Celts, in the royal houses, in the random scatter of the modern population. The microscope reveals the shadow of the helix, the place on the chromosome where the gene should be but isn't. It is a ghost gene. Some geneticists gently suggest that it is a deletion mutation, a random error that drifted to high frequency in a small population, the refuge of stone hypothesis we visited earlier. But others, in the quiet corners of the faculty lounge, wonder if it is something else. Is it a knockout gene, a deliberate modification, or a relic of a different evolutionary path entirely, one that did not walk hand in hand with the rhesus macaque? The shadow grows longer when we realize that this condition seems unique to humans. We do not find Rh-negative chimpanzees or gorillas in the wild. The great apes are overwhelmingly positive. We are the only animal that has developed a blood type that declares war on its own pregnancy. It feels like a biological glitch, or perhaps a tamper-evident seal that has been broken. The modern laboratory becomes a place of uneasy wonder. We see the doctors developing the Rogum shot in the late 1960s, a miracle of chemistry that finally brokered a peace treaty between the Rh-negative mother and her positive child. It is a synthetic shield, a way to trick the sentry of the immune system into sleeping through the invasion. The invisible wall is finally breached, not by nature, but by the needle. The tragedy of the second-born is halted, but the cure does not explain the disease. It masks the mystery. By saving the babies, we have allowed the enigma to spread even further, mixing the lineages until the old blue blood maps are blurred beyond recognition. The shadow of the helix is now everywhere, hidden in the veins of millions who will never know the danger their ancestors faced. We can feel the clinical coldness of this realization. The blood is no longer a myth of the Nephilim or a sign of the kings. It is a medical status, a line on a chart, a plastic bracelet on a newborn's wrist, and yet the alien quality persists. We look at the structure of the Rh proteins themselves. They are ion channels, gateways that control the flow of ammonia and carbon dioxide across the cell membrane. They are breathers. The Rh-negative cell breathes differently. It interacts with the gas of the atmosphere in a way that is subtly molecularly distinct. Does this explain the cold fire? Does the lack of the protein change the way the body handles oxygen, perhaps adapting it for high altitudes, for thin air, for the deep breath of the diver? Science offers a tentative maybe, but the funding is scarce. The anomaly is treated as a problem to be managed, not a window to be opened. The conspiracy of silence is not necessarily a cabal of dark robes. It is the silence of a science that prefers easy answers. The R-negative question is too hard, too weird, too close to the forbidden zones of human origin. It is left in the shadow. But for the individual lying on the exam table, watching the vial of dark red fluid being drawn from their arm, the feeling is not clinical. It is profound. They watch the blood fill the tube, that ancient copper-smelling river, and they know, with the silent knowledge of their kin, that there is more in that vial than just cells. There's a history of ice and stone, of star maps and sea voyages, of a rejection that became an identity. The DNA helix spirals in the dark of the nucleus, twisting like the serpents on the staff of Hermes, and in the gap where the antigen should be, there is a silence that screams. It is the silence of the missing link. The scientist writes Rh-negative on the label, a sterile classification, but the blood knows better. It knows it is the keeper of the no. It knows it is the remnant of the other. And as the centrifuge spins, separating the serum from the cells, whirling at thousands of revolutions per minute, it mimics the turning of the earth, the turning of the ages, spinning the story out into the harsh light of the fluorescent bulb, where it remains just as visible and just as impenetrable as it was by the campfire 40,000 years ago. The shadow of the helix is not a void. It is a space left open, perhaps for a reason we have yet to comprehend. A blank page in the book of life, waiting for the final chapter to be written. The needle is withdrawn, the cotton is pressed to the skin, a tiny spot of red blooms like a flower. And the mystery flows on, circulating through the heart of the modern world, hiding in plain sight, a secret carried in the veins of the 15% who are walking, breathing anomalies, the children of a question mark that evolution has never bothered to erase. The centrifuge slows to a halt, the laboratory lights flicker and fade, and the sharp, sterile edges of the modern world soften once again into the gentle, familiar shadows of your own room. We have traveled a great distance tonight, drifting from the first spark of the anomaly in the freezing winds of the Paleolithic to the quiet, hidden valleys of the Pyrenees, from the golden thrones of the god kings to the lonely vigil of the sentry scanning the horizon. But now, the journey circles back to the only place that truly matters. The here, the now, the rhythmic rise and fall of your own chest in the dark. The story we have told is not just a collection of facts or myths. It is a mirror held up to the invisible river that flows through you. Whether you are one of the 15% who carry the negative spark, or one of the majority who shares the ancient bond of the positive, the mystery of the blood is part of your inheritance. It is a reminder that the human body is not a machine built of plastic and wire, but a vessel of deep time, carrying the memories of ice ages, of great floods, of desperate survivals and silent sacrifices within every beat of the heart. The river flows on, winding its way through the landscape of your veins, carrying the oxygen of the present moment to cells that are built from the dust of stars and the clay of the earth. If you are one of the carriers, perhaps the feeling of not belonging that has shadowed you is not a flaw to be fixed, but a frequency to be tuned. Perhaps the cold fire that burns within is not a chill, but a lantern kept lit for a long night that your ancestors knew would eventually end. The sense of being an outsider, the intuition that rings like a bell, the sensitivity to the light and the noise. These are not symptoms of a disorder. They are the credentials of a survivor. They are the proof that you are the descendant of the sentries, the watchers, the ones who stood on the wall when the world was wild and kept the flame alive. You are the living bridge to a past that history has forgotten, but that your body remembers. And if you do not carry the trait, you are the witness to this enigma, the partner in the dance, the earth that grounds the lightning. We are all part of the same vast, complex tapestry, woven from thread that is red and thread that is blue, the yes and the no, the earth and the sky. The tension of the invisible wall is gone now. There are no battles to be fought in the womb of the night, no kingdoms to defend, no oceans to cross. There is only the peace of the body at rest. The blood moves quietly, efficiently, feeding the dream, repairing the wear of the day, washing away the doubt. It flows with the wisdom of millions of years, knowing exactly what to do without you having to lift a finger. You can trust it. You can trust the river. It has brought you this far through the bottlenecks of extinction and the crushing weight of glaciers, and it will carry you through this night into the morning. The enigma of the RH negative blood remains unsolved by science, a beautiful question mark suspended in the code of life. But tonight, it does not need an answer. It only needs to be felt. It is the hum of the universe inside you. It is the star fire cooling into the steady warmth of sleep. The camera of the mind pulls back for the final time, leaving the specific details of the history behind, the bison on the cave wall, the serpent on the staff, the ship on the gray Atlantic, and seeing only the sleeper, safe and warm, a small, precious point of life in the vast, turning galaxy. The conspiracy of silence is broken not by shouting, but by this quiet acknowledgement. I remember. I feel it. I am part of the story. The blood flows on, a silent red river moving through the dark, carrying the secrets of the past toward the ocean of the future, and you are simply the boat, drifting gently on the current, held up by the deep, mysterious waters of life, drifting, drifting, drifting toward the shore of dreams. The narrative has ended now. The images of the ice and the fire have dissolved into the soft gray static of sleep. There is nothing left to learn, nothing left to track, nothing left to watch. The sentry has put down his spear and closed his eyes. The king has taken off the heavy crown. The ships are all at anchor in the harbor, rocking gently on the tide. The wind outside has dropped to a whisper, and the world has slowed down to the speed of your breathing. Slow, deep, steady. You are safe here, anchored in the present, yet held by the ancient loving arms of the past. The mystery of who you are is safe within you, a treasure buried deep, requiring no map and no key. It is just there, beating softly in the dark. Let the weight of the body sink into the bed. Let the mind release the story. Let the river take you. You are part of the earth, part of the sky, part of the silence. Sweet dreams.